Chadwick. I'm from a small little village in the south of Cambridgeshire. I grew up and fell in love with football at a really young age. I think my first recollections of playing football was in the back garden with my brother and my dad. We lived in a really small house, but was extremely lucky to have a massive back garden. So spent the majority of my time in there. Probably the one memory that I've got of sort of when football became a little bit my world sort of thing was the first experience of going to a live football game, going to watch Cambridge United at the Abbey Stadium as probably a 6-year-old kid, and just sort of being encapsulated by it all, sort of the smell of the turf, being so close to the players, part of the atmosphere, hearing the crowd singing, and it sort of blew my mind. And when I walked out of the football ground, I was sort of on cloud 9 that day, and I was desperate to go back. And I've sort of spent every waking minute after that playing football in the back garden, in the house when it was raining outside and whatnot. So that was certainly what really festered my love, really. I was always keen running around as a kid, as all kids obviously are, but it was that first experience of experiencing a live football game that I'd say had probably the biggest effect on me as a really young child. And then starting my footballing journey in the local village team, they were called Melbourne Tigers. You'd go into playing organised football when I was younger at under 9s, and we were straight onto a full-size football pitch with full-size goals. So it was obviously a lot different to what it is now. And I had a huge amount of success because as a child I was freakishly fast. So I used to be the striker. I'd stand at the top of the pitch. My teammates would whack the ball over the little defenders' heads, and I'd just chase after it and tap it in the goal. And it was them early experiences and having so much success in them early experiences that sort of probably made me love the game more and practice even more, and sort of continue to improve as the years went on.
And at that stage, you know, you're flying along, everything's going amazing, you know, at that sort of teenage years. So where does it sort of transition from those moments into, obviously, you know, your career from there?
Yeah, I think obviously growing up all through my sort of formative teenage years, one thing that I certainly lacked a lot of was confidence. Sort of away from the football pitch, I was a very quiet, shy, timid boy, but the football pitch was sort of the place where I could express myself, the place where I could do what I love to do and would just go there. And that was me, really. I was a footballer, and probably to my detriment as time went on, in terms of probably just seeing myself as a talented footballer and not really learning about myself, why I weren't confident, why I was so quiet. And it was probably to my detriment as the years went on, as I say, going into football, because all I ever saw myself as was a football player, really. Probably when I first got recognised at 10, 11 years old, and then going through my experience, it was all, my whole life was football. There was obviously other things going on alongside it, but that is the toughest time, when obviously when that football career comes to an end 20 years, 25 years down the line, where it is a real struggle, because I've never really taken the time out to understand myself, because it was purely football was a be all and end all. Football was my first love, the first thing I fell in love with at, like I say, at 6, 7 years old. And then what now when it's gone? So it's certainly, completely agree what you say in terms of confidence is something that comes and goes at certain times, but I think that is the importance of understanding yourself as a human being. Obviously we're all different, and we all, different things floats our boats, does different things to us, and sort of understanding where that confidence is and how we can find it when we need it.
Man United, was that your first sort of youth contract? Was that your first contract then, was it?
Yeah, so I signed for Manchester United when I was 14 years old. So I spent my school years from 14 to 16 still in Cambridge, but travelling up to Manchester every weekend and sort of playing games over the weekend and spending all the school holidays up there. Then when I left school at 16, I immediately moved up to Manchester to sort of start my journey as a YTS apprentice player for the next 2 years, living in digs. So I went from...
Were you still cleaning boots at that point? Were you still cleaning boots?
Still cleaning boots, doing all the jobs. It was a tough old time, but of course, like moving from a tiny little village in the south of Cambridge up to Salford, where it was all I'd ever seen anything like that. And living there was like on Coronation Street. So I was living a different world, and that was sort of that transition, and obviously being homesick for the first few weeks and sort of crying on the phone to my mum saying I wanted to come home. But after got through that initial period, it was incredible. Obviously, I've just left school. I'm out of all them boring lessons that I didn't pay much attention to. I'm doing what I love every day, playing football, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Obviously, physically hard on the body and whatnot, but it was an incredible time. And I think most footballers will say that sort of period from 16 to 18 is where you really, it's still so much fun, and you're sort of building relationships with your peers that you'll have forever.
And so when you were coming through between 16 and 18, who would have been sort of the youth players around you, just for, you know, sort of general football fans? Who would have been sort of the youth players that were playing with you at that point?
So the ones that had sort of stellar careers at the club would have been Wes Brown, was a year older than me, and John O'Shea was in my year. There was some other players that went on like myself to have careers in the game, like Richie Wellens, who had a really good career, Paul Rachubka, a goalkeeper, David Healy, who obviously played for Northern Ireland and had a really good career. So there was the thing at United, there's obviously not that many that get through and stay at the club for that long. You've got to be an incredible player to do that, but there's still the opportunity, like myself, to still have a career in football, albeit not at that top level.
So when you got into Man United, what would you say is, I suppose, your sort of highlight? Is it the first appearance, or is it just a specific moment? Or
I think my highlight would be scoring against Leeds at Ellen Road, obviously massive rivals.
Apologies to Leeds fans there, just in case they just tuned off.
But I think that would have been sort of the standout moment of scoring that goal. I think I've got many incredible memories. I went off on loan to Royal Antwerp in Belgium, and when I recalled, that's when I was in the first team, and I remember quite distinctly my first training session, and in Belgium I was one of the best players and sort of in the team every week, obviously completely different at Manchester United. I remember giving a pass away in one of my first training sessions, and Roy Keane calling me every name under the sun, and thinking, oh, I weren't expecting that sort of thing. But that was sort of the environment there. It was completely different. Obviously, Antwerp were a fantastic football club, but Manchester United, the standards, and rightly so, in an elite environment, were so high, and that was what was expected of you day in, day out, really.
You see that, you know, for yourself when you're coming through with sort of management styles and coaches and players, that some people just can't cope with certain elements. And how do you cope if you're sort of struggling in those situations?
Yeah, I think in the football industry, I think the game's changed in terms of them years when I was coming through. That was sort of the approach that was taken. It was sort of that command style, where I think it's so important. If that is a style, you've got to have the utmost respect for them people that are telling you in no uncertain terms, which obviously when you're talking about Roy Keane or Sir Alex Ferguson, I and the rest of the squad had the utmost respect for them people. And I think in sort of what it was, the culture at Manchester United, it was a culture of winning, and to win games week in, week out, it meant that training had to be bang on every day. So I think everyone recognised that, and you were there to work. You knew it was going to be intense, and that's how you wanted it, because you were at the best club in the world. I think in terms of Sir Alex, the way that he ran that football club, it was the relationships that he built with people was his genius, really, regardless of all the football knowledge, etc., that he had. When I mentioned earlier, I went up to the club on trial at the age of 14 years old, and by the time I got back to my house in Cambridge, the manager had phoned up my mum to ask her permission for me to sign for the club. And when Sir Alex Ferguson does that, you're going to sign for that club. And it weren't just me he'd do that for. He'd do it for all the players he wanted to sign, regardless of their age. He'd take the time to know everyone, to know a detail about them, to make them feel 50 foot tall. So when you did get that telling off, you weren't going to obviously say anything back to him, and it weren't obviously scary if the great man was shouting at you. But the worst thing in the world was the feeling that you'd let him down. And he was the one person that you never wanted to let down. He was the one person you wanted to say him to say well done to you. So I think it's not just a case of these people just didn't shout at you for the sake of it. They shouted at you for the right reason, and that was for your improvement, but also more importantly, the organisation's improvement. I think, like I said earlier, I think the style of management has changed now in all walks of life, and as the world has changed, and obviously there's more emphasis put on that sort of emotional side of things, that emotional intelligence, that empathy of understanding how other people feel to get the best out of them and for them to get the best out of themselves, which is how football's gone as well, I think. And I think that's for the good, really, because we want everyone happy with a positive mental health and being able to do the job at their best of their abilities. But I think when you are, and everyone needs that sort of, well, the majority, I know I do need that kick up the backside sometimes. If it's done in the right way and you respect that person that's telling you that, then it's to the, not to the detriment, but for the good of your sort of continual development.
When you move from Man United, which is obviously a big adjustment, isn't it? And when I say mindset makes moments, this is one of those sort of pivotal moments, isn't it? When you're right at the sort of top of the tree, I suppose, in terms of that industry. How do you adjust, you know, from that? You know, what's it like mentally? Is it like a pressure release where you say, oh, and breathe, you know, sort of in? Because, I mean, I've spoken to various other athletes when they're right at that level. For some it can be unbearable. The level of that pressure and expectation can just almost be too much for them. And some have actually said it's taken family moments, unfortunately, that happened, that put it into context. How did you cope with that transition from Man United, from your career afterwards?
Yeah, I think in terms of where my ambition, all I ever wanted to do was be a footballer. So regardless of whether, obviously I was lucky enough to play for such a wonderful club like Manchester United, but even sort of coming away from there, it was still an adventure. I was still excited. I didn't lose any sort of motivation. I think from when I played for Manchester United, I sort of suffered a couple of injuries, and the reason I played for Manchester United was that same reason why I scored all them goals when I was a kid, because I was freakishly fast and I could run really fast with the ball. And I think I had a couple of problems with my hip and pelvis, and which resulted in surgery, and I'd lost a tiny bit of that pace. And without that pace, I didn't have enough else, really. I weren't like Ryan Giggs, who could come inside and do something fantastic, or David Beckham, who could play a 70-yard pass. So the manager was completely honest with me and said, like, without that sort of blistering pace, you're not going to be at a level to play for Manchester United. It'll be really hard to play at that sort of top end of football, which is obviously hard to hear, but also appreciate the honesty. Again, I appreciate the honesty on that quite blunt conversation because of the respect that I had for him. If it was someone else that I didn't have that relationship with, I probably would have been distraught about hearing that information. But at the same time, I think I was never into that sort of famous side of it. I never ever wanted to be famous. All I ever wanted to do was to play football, really. So obviously stepping away from a team like Manchester United, it does give you that opportunity where you're not under the microscope all the time. It is a little bit more relaxed. And I loved playing for Manchester United, don't get me wrong, but probably didn't love people knowing who I was. So it was obviously gets slightly easier the other clubs you play for, where it's not as intense, sort of that media scrutiny and what people write about you in the newspapers, etc. So it was obviously disappointing to leave the club that I'd grown up with, but at the same time, like you mentioned there, maybe a little bit of relief of just stepping away from being in the public eye, as it were.
Some of the world's best in every industries haven't always shined under that, and that, you know, and that'll go right across every sort of business and every industry. There isn't any, you know, and people that'll go down in history, some of the world's best, haven't had great World Cups. History tends to be kind to you, doesn't it? As years go on, history does tend to look back a little bit more fondly, and hopefully it's done, obviously, you know, with yourself, you know, with people who look back and go, do you know what, really good player, played really well for Man United, played really well in the clubs that he was at. And to be honest, you weren't guilty of anything. You're very fat that you had some of Man United's very best players all playing with you at the same time. And if you're being compared to that, hey, it's actually a compliment. You know, it does in the times when you think it sounds like a criticism, when you look back and go, do you know what though? Hey, not bad to be compared to what people revere as some of the world's absolute best players ever. That's a pretty good position to be in, isn't it? But it's like you say, it's only when you get further down the line that you can look at it that way, isn't it? I suppose, you know, on that side. So what is life and times like for sort of Luke Chadwick sort of post sort of footballing career then? So what's happening with yourself at the moment then, Luke? Tell the audience what sort of ventures Luke's been on.
Yeah, so it's been quite a roller coaster since finishing playing. It was a real, like I mentioned earlier, I had a real struggle in terms of mentally dealing with the fact that football was over, never really taking responsibility or admitting that the game was over for a good couple of years. And after stopping playing, went down sort of the coaching route, done all my coaching qualifications, worked at a professional club, but didn't really enjoy it. So probably around a couple of years ago now, stepped into a new organisation called the Football Fun Factory, which is all around offering children an experience in football in a completely pressure-free environment, just trying to develop a love for the game regardless of ability really, and using football as a vehicle to develop really positive life skills like teamwork, communication, sportsmanship. So it's a really rewarding organisation to be involved in. Obviously, we've had our challenges like everyone over the last 12 months, but we're sort of a growing company. We've got 30 head coaches, franchisees all across the southeast of England, and we sort of got the ambition for 2021 now, it's finally getting going a little bit, is to grow into a nationwide organisation. So it's something completely different to what I've ever done before, but hugely exciting at the same time, really enjoying doing something different, and really believe that it's something really positive as well at the same time. So it's that's sort of where I'm at the moment, and that's what we'll be hoping to drive forward in the coming month. Thanks, Paul. Much appreciated. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you today.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Luke. Speak to you soon.
Take care, Paul.
Take care, Luke.